Chapter 5 of Herland. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elizabeth Klett. Herland, by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Chapter 5. A Unique History. It is no use for me to try to piece out this account with adventures. If the people who read it are not interested in these amazing women and their history, they will not be interested at all. As for us, 3 young men to a whole landful of women, what could we do? We did get away, as described, and were peacefully brought back again without, as Terry complained, even the satisfaction of hitting anybody. There were no adventures because there was nothing to fight. There were no wild beasts in the country, and very few tame ones. Of these I might as well stop to describe the one common pet of the country. Cats, of course. But such cats! What do you suppose these Lady Burbanks had done with their cats? By the most prolonged and careful selection and exclusion, they had developed a race of cats that did not sing. That's a fact. The most those poor dumb brutes could do was to make a kind of squeak when they were hungry or wanted the door open, and of course to purr, and to make the various mother noises to their kittens. Moreover, they had ceased to kill birds. They were rigorously bred to destroy mice and moles and all such enemies of the food supply. But the birds were numerous and safe. While we were discussing birds, Terry asked them if they used feathers for their hats, and they seemed amused at the idea. He made a few sketches of our women's hats, with plumes and quills and those various tickling things that stick out so far, and they were eagerly interested, as at everything about our women. As for them, they said they only wore hats for shade when working in the sun, and those were big, light straw hats, something like those used in China and Japan. In cold weather they wore caps or hoods. "But for decorative purposes, don't you think they would be becoming?" pursued Terry, making as pretty a picture as he could of a lady with a plumed hat. They by no means agreed to that, asking quite simply if the men wore the same kind. We hastened to assure her that they did not, drew for them our kind of headgear. "And do no men wear feathers in their hats?" "Only Indians," Jeff explained. "Savages, you know." And he sketched a war bonnet to show them. "And soldiers," I added, drawing a military hat with plumes. They never expressed horror or disapproval, nor indeed much surprise, just a keen interest. And the notes they made, miles of them! But to return to our pussycats, we were a good deal impressed by this achievement in breeding, and when they questioned us, I can tell you we were well pumped for information. We told of what had been done for dogs and horses and cattle, but that there was no effort applied to cats, except for show purposes. I wish I could represent the kind, quiet, steady, ingenious way they questioned us. It was not just curiosity. They weren't a bit more curious about us than we were about them, if as much. But they were bent on understanding our kind of civilization, and their lines of interrogation would gradually surround us and drive us in till we found ourselves up against some admissions we did not want to make. "Are all these breeds of dogs you have made useful?" they asked. "Oh, useful! Why, the hunting dogs and watch dogs and sheep dogs are useful, and sled dogs, of course, and ratters, I suppose, but we don't keep dogs for their usefulness. The dog is the friend of man, we say. We love them." That they understood. We love our cats that way. They surely are our friends, and helpers too. You can see how intelligent and affectionate they are. It was a fact. I'd never seen such cats, except in a few rare instances. Big, handsome, silky things, friendly with everyone, and devotedly attached to their special owners. "You must have a heartbreaking time drowning kittens," we suggested. But they said, "Oh, no. You see, we care for them as you do for your valuable cattle. The fathers are few compared to the mothers, just a few very fine ones in each town, They live quite happily in walled gardens and the houses of their friends, but they only have a mating season once a year." "Rather hard on Thomas, isn't it?" suggested Terry. "Oh, no, truly. You see, it is many centuries that we have been breeding the kind of cats we wanted. They are healthy and happy and friendly, as you see. How do you manage with your dogs? Do you keep them in pairs, or segregate the fathers, or what?" Then we explained that it wasn't a question of fathers exactly, that nobody wanted a mother dog, that practically all our dogs were males. There was only a very small percentage of females allowed to live. Then Zava, observing Terry with her grave, sweet smile, quoted back at him, "Rather hard on Thomas, isn't it? Do they enjoy it, living without mates? Are your dogs as uniformly healthy and sweet-tempered as our cats?" Jeff laughed, eyeing Terry mischievously. As a matter of fact, we began to feel Jeff something of a traitor. He so often flopped over and took their side of things. Also, his medical knowledge gave him a different point of view somehow. "I'm sorry to admit," he told them, "that the dog, with us, is the most diseased of any animal, next to man. And as to temper, there are always some dogs who bite people, especially children." That was pure malice. You see, children were the raison d'etre in this country. All our interlocutors sat up straight at once. They were still gentle, still restrained, but there was a note of deep amazement in their voices. "Do we understand that you keep an animal, an unmated male animal, that bites children? About how many are there of them, please?" "Thousands, in a large city," said Jeff, "and nearly every family has one in the country." Terry broke in at this. "You must not imagine they are all dangerous. It's not 1 in 100 that ever bites anybody. Why, they are the best friends of the children. A boy doesn't have half a chance that hasn't a dog to play with." "And the girls?" asked Somel. "Oh, girls, why, they like them too," he said, but his voice flatted a little. They always noticed little things like that, we found later. Little by little they wrung from us the fact that the friend of man, in the city, was a prisoner, was taken out for his meagre exercise on a leash, was liable not only to many diseases but to the one destroying horror of rabies, and in many cases, for the safety of the citizens, had to go muzzled. Jeff maliciously added vivid instances he had known or read of injury and death from mad dogs. They did not scold or fuss about it. Calm as judges, those women were. But they made notes. Moadine read them to us. "Please tell me if I have the facts correct," she said. "In your country, and in others too?" "Yes," we admitted, "in most civilized countries." "In most civilized countries a kind of animal is kept which is no longer useful?" "They are a protection," Terry insisted. "They bark if burglars try to get in." Then she made notes of burglars, and went on, "Because of the love which people bear to this animal." Zava interrupted here. "Is it the men or the women who love this animal so much?" "Both," insisted Terry. "Equally?" she inquired. And Jeff said, "Nonsense, Terry, you know men like dogs better than women do, as a whole." "Because they love it so much, especially men, this animal is kept shut up or chained." "Why?" suddenly asked Somel. "We keep our father cats shut up because we do not want too much fathering, but they are not chained. They have large grounds to run in." "A valuable dog would be stolen if he was let loose," I said. "We put collars on them, with the owner's name, in case they do stray. Besides, they get into fights. A valuable dog might easily be killed by a bigger one." "I see," she said. "They fight when they meet. Is that common?" We admitted that it was. "They are kept shut up or chained?" She paused again and asked, "Is not a dog fond of running? Are they not built for speed?" That we admitted too, and Jeff, still malicious, enlightened them further. "I've always thought it was a pathetic sight, both ways, to see a man or a woman taking a dog to walk, at the end of a string." "Have you bred them to be as neat in their habits as cats are?" was the next question. And when Jeff told them of the effect of dogs on sidewalk merchandise and the streets generally, they found it hard to believe. You see, their country was as neat as a Dutch kitchen, and as to sanitation... But I might as well start in now with as much as I can remember of the history of this amazing country before further description. And I'll summarize here a bit as to our opportunities for learning it. I will not try to repeat the careful, detailed account I lost. I'll just say that we were kept in that fortress a good 6 months all told, and after that 3 in a pleasant enough city where, to Terry's infinite disgust, there were only colonels and little children, no young women whatever. Then we were under surveillance for 3 more, always with a tutor or a guard or both. But those months were pleasant, because we were really getting acquainted with the girls. That was a chapter, or will be. I will try to do justice to it. We learned their language pretty thoroughly. Had to. And they learned ours much more quickly, and used it to hasten our own studies. Jeff, who was never without reading matter of some sort, had 2 little books with him, a novel and a little anthology of verse, and I had one of those pocket encyclopedias, a fat little thing bursting with facts. These were used in our education, and theirs. Then, as soon as we were up to it, they furnished us with plenty of their own books, and I went in for the history part. I wanted to understand the genesis of this miracle of theirs. And this is what happened, according to their records. As to geography, at about the time of the Christian era, this land had a free passage to the sea. I'm not saying where, for good reasons. But there was a fairly easy pass through that wall of mountains behind us, and there is no doubt in my mind that these people were of Aryan stock, and were once in contact with the best civilization of the Old World. They were white, but somewhat darker than our northern races because of their constant exposure to sun and air. The country was far larger then, including much land beyond the pass, and a strip of coast. They had ships, commerce, an army, a king, for at that time they were what they so calmly called us, a bisexual race. What happened to them first was merely a succession of historic misfortunes, such as have befallen other nations often enough. They were decimated by war, driven up from their coastline till finally the reduced population, with many of the men killed in battle, occupied this hinterland, and defended it for years in the mountain passes. Where it was open to any possible attack from below, they strengthened the natural defenses, so that it became unscalably secure, as we found it. They were a polygamous people, and a slave-holding people, like all of their time. And during the generation or 2 of this struggle to defend their mountain home, they built the fortresses, such as the one we were held in, and other of their oldest buildings, some still in use. Nothing but earthquakes could destroy such architecture, huge solid blocks, holding by their own weight. They must have had efficient workmen, and enough of them in those days. They made a brave fight for their existence, but no nation can stand up against what the steamship companies call an act of God. While the whole fighting force was doing its best to defend their mountain pathway, there occurred a volcanic outburst, with some local tremors, and the result was the complete filling up of the pass, their only outlet. Instead of a passage, a new ridge, sheer and high, stood between them and the sea. They were walled in, and beneath that wall lay their whole little army. Very few men were left alive, save the slaves, and these now seized their opportunity, rose in revolt, killed their remaining masters, even to the youngest boy, killed the old women too, and the mothers, intending to take possession of the country with the remaining young women and girls. But this succession of misfortunes was too much for those infuriated virgins. There were many of them, and but few of these would-be masters. So the young women, instead of submitting, rose in sheer desperation and slew their brutal conquerors. This sounds like Titus Andronicus, I know, but that is their account. I suppose they were about crazy. Can you blame them? There was literally no one left on this beautiful high garden land but a bunch of hysterical girls and some older slave women. That was about 2,000 years ago. At first there was a period of sheer despair. The mountains towered between them and their old enemies, but also between them and escape. There was no way up or down or out. They simply had to stay there. Some were for suicide, but not the majority. They must have been a plucky lot as a whole, and they decided to live, as long as they did live. Of course they had hope, as youth must, that something would happen to change their fates. So they set to work, to bury the dead, to plough and sow, to care for one another. Speaking of burying the dead, I will set down while I think of it, that they had adopted cremation in about the 13th century, for the same reason that they had left off raising cattle. They could not spare the room. They were much surprised to learn that we were still burying, asked our reasons for it, and were much dissatisfied with what we gave. We told them of the belief in the resurrection of the body, and they asked if our God was not as well able to resurrect from ashes as from long corruption. We told them of how people thought it was repugnant to have their loved ones burn, and they asked if it was less repugnant to have them decay. They were inconveniently reasonable, those women. Well, that original bunch of girls set to work to clean up the place and make their living as best they could. Some of the remaining slave women rendered invaluable service, teaching such trades as they knew. They had such records as were then kept, all the tools and implements of the time, and a most fertile land to work in. There were a handful of the younger matrons who had escaped slaughter, and a few babies were born after the cataclysm, but only 2 boys, and they both died. For 5 or 10 years they worked together, growing stronger and wiser, and more mutually attached. And then the miracle happened. One of these young women bore a child. Of course they all thought there must be a man somewhere, but none was found. Then they decided it must be a direct gift from the gods, and placed the proud mother in the temple of Maya, their goddess of motherhood, under strict watch. And there, as the years passed, this wonder woman bore child after child, 5 of them, all girls. I did my best, keenly interested as I have always been in sociology and social psychology, to reconstruct in my mind the real position of these ancient women. There were some 500 or 600 of them, and they were harem-bred. Yet for the few preceding generations they had been reared in the atmosphere of such heroic struggle that the stock must have been toughened somewhat. Left alone in that terrific orphanhood, they had clung together, supporting one another and their little sisters, and developing unknown powers in the stress of new necessity. To this pain-hardened and work-strengthened group, who had lost not only the love and care of parents, but the hope of ever having children of their own, there now dawned the new hope. Here at last was motherhood, and though it was not for all of them personally, it might, if the power was inherited, found here a new race. It may be imagined how those 5 daughters of Maya, children of the temple, mothers of the future, they had all the titles that love and hope and reverence could give, were reared. The whole little nation of women surrounded them with loving service, and waited, between a boundless hope and an equally boundless despair, to see if they too would be mothers. And they were. As fast as they reached the age of 25 they began bearing. Each of them, like her mother, bore 5 daughters. Presently there were 25 new women, mothers in their own right, and the whole spirit of the country changed from mourning and mere courageous resignation to proud joy. The older women, those who remembered men, died off. The youngest of all the first lot of course died too after a while, and by that time there were left 155 parthenogenetic women, founding a new race. They inherited all that the devoted care of that declining band of original ones could leave them. Their little country was quite safe. Their farms and gardens were all in full production. Such industries as they had were in careful order. The records of their past were all preserved, and for years the older women had spent their time in the best teaching they were capable of, that they might leave to the little group of sisters and mothers all they possessed of skill and knowledge. There you have the start of Herland. One family, all descended from one mother. She lived to 100 years old, lived to see her 125 great-granddaughters born, lived as a queen priestess mother of them all, and died with a nobler pride and a fuller joy than perhaps any human soul has ever known. She alone had founded a new race. The first 5 daughters had grown up in an atmosphere of holy calm, of awed watchful waiting, of breathless prayer. To them the longed-for motherhood was not only a personal joy, but a nation's hope. Their 25 daughters in turn, with a stronger hope, a richer, wider outlook, with the devoted love and care of all the surviving population, grew up as a holy sisterhood, their whole ardent youth looking forward to their great office. And at last they were left alone. The white-haired first mother was gone, and this one family, 5 sisters, 25 first cousins, and 125 second cousins, began a new race. Here you have human beings, unquestionably, but what we were slow in understanding was how these ultra-women, inheriting only from women, had eliminated not only certain masculine characteristics, which of course we did not look for, but so much of what we had always thought essentially feminine. The tradition of men as guardians and protectors had quite died out. These stalwart virgins had no men to fear, and therefore no need of protection. As to wild beasts, there were none in their sheltered land. The power of mother-love, that maternal instinct we so highly laud, was theirs, of course, raised to its highest power, and a sister-love which, even while recognizing the actual relationship, we found it hard to credit. Terry, incredulous, even contemptuous, when we were alone, refused to believe the story. "A lot of traditions as old as Herodotus, and about as trustworthy," he said. "It's likely women, just a pack of women, would have hung together like that. We all know women can't organize, that they scrap like anything, are frightfully jealous." "But these new ladies didn't have anyone to be jealous of, remember," drawled Jeff. "That's a likely story," Terry sneered. "Why don't you invent a likelier one?" I asked him. "Here are the women. Nothing but women, and you yourself admit there's no trace of a man in the country." This was after we had been about a good deal. "I'll admit that," he growled, "and it's a big miss, too. There's not only no fun without 'em, no real sport, no competition, but these women aren't womanly. You know they aren't." That kind of talk always set Jeff going, and I gradually grew to side with him. "Then you don't call a breed of women whose one concern is motherhood womanly?" he asked. "Indeed I don't," snapped Terry. "What does a man care for motherhood, when he hasn't a ghost of a chance at fatherhood? And besides, what's the good of talking sentiment when we are just men together? What a man wants of women is a good deal more than all this motherhood." We were as patient as possible with Terry. He had lived about 9 months among the colonels when he made that outburst, and with no chance at any more strenuous excitement than our gymnastics gave us, save for our escape fiasco. I don't suppose Terry had ever lived so long with neither love, combat, nor danger to employ his superabundant energies, and he was irritable. Neither Jeff nor I found it so wearing. I was so much interested intellectually that our confinement did not wear on me, and as for Jeff, bless his heart, he enjoyed the society of that tutor of his almost as much as if she had been a girl. I don't know but more. And to Terry's criticism, it was true. These women, whose essential distinction of motherhood was the dominant note of their whole culture, were strikingly deficient in what we call femininity. This led me very promptly to the conviction that those feminine charms we are so fond of are not feminine at all, but mere reflected masculinity, developed to please us because they had to please us, and in no way essential to the real fulfillment of their great process. But Terry came to no such conclusion. "Just you wait till I get out," he muttered. Then we both cautioned him. "Look here, Terry, my boy, you be careful. They've been mighty good to us, but do you remember the anesthesia? If you do any mischief in this virgin land, beware of the vengeance of the maiden aunts. Come, be a man. It won't be forever." To return to the history. They began at once to plan, and built for their children, all the strength and intelligence of the whole of them devoted to that one thing. Each girl, of course, was reared in full knowledge of her crowning office, and they had, even then, very high ideas of the moulding powers of the mother, as well as those of education. Such high ideals as they had! Beauty, health, strength, intellect, goodness, for those they prayed and worked. They had no enemies. They themselves were all sisters and friends. The land was fair before them, and a great future began to form itself in their minds. The religion they had to begin with was much like that of old Greece, a number of gods and goddesses, but they lost all interest in deities of war and plunder, and gradually centred on their mother goddess altogether. Then, as they grew more intelligent, this had turned into a sort of maternal pantheism. Here was Mother Earth, bearing fruit. All that they ate was fruit of motherhood, from seed or egg or their product. By motherhood they were born, and by motherhood they lived. Life was, to them, just the long cycle of motherhood. But very early they recognized the need of improvement as well as of mere repetition, and devoted their combined intelligence to that problem, how to make the best kind of people. First, this was merely the hope of bearing better ones, and then they recognized that however the children differed at birth, the real growth lay later, through education. Then things began to hum. As I learned more and more to appreciate what these women had accomplished, the less proud I was of what we, with all our manhood, had done. You see, they had had no wars. They had had no kings, and no priests, and no aristocracies. They were sisters, and as they grew together, not by competition, but by united action. We tried to put in a good word for competition, and they were keenly interested. Indeed, we soon found from their earnest questions of us that they were prepared to believe our world must be better than theirs. They were not sure, they wanted to know, but there was no such arrogance about them as might have been expected. We rather spread ourselves, telling of the advantages of competition, how it developed fine qualities, that without it there would be no stimulus to industry. Terry was very strong on that point. No stimulus to industry, they repeated with that puzzled look we had learned to know so well. Stimulus to industry? But don't you like to work? No man would work unless he had to, Terry declared. Oh, no man? You mean that is one of your sex distinctions? No, indeed, he said hastily. No one, I mean man or woman, would work without incentive. Competition is the motor power, you see. It is not with us, they explained gently, so it is hard for us to understand. Do you mean, for instance, that with you no mother would work for her children without the stimulus of competition? No, he admitted that he did not mean that. Mothers, he supposed, would work, of course, for their children in the home, but the world's work was different. That had to be done by men, and required the competitive element. All our teachers were eagerly interested. We want so much to know. You have the whole world to tell us of, and we have only our little land. And there are two of you, the two sexes, to love and help one another. It must be a rich and wonderful world. Tell us, what is the work of the world that men do, which we have not here? Oh, everything, Terry said grandly. The men do everything with us. He squared his broad shoulders and lifted his chest. We do not allow our women to work. Women are loved, idolized, honored, kept in the home to care for the children. What is the home? Asked Somel a little wistfully. But Zava begged, Tell me first, do no women work, really? Why, yes, Terry admitted. Some have to, of the poorer sort. About how many in your country? About 7 or 8 million, said Jeff, as mischievous as ever. End of chapter 5. Chapter 6 of Herland. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elizabeth Klett. Herland by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Chapter 6. Comparisons are odious. I had always been proud of my country, of course. Everyone is. Compared with the other lands and other races I knew, the United States of America had always seemed to me, speaking modestly, as good as the best of them. But just as a clear-eyed, intelligent, perfectly honest, and well-meaning child will frequently jar one's self-esteem by innocent questions, so did these women, without the slightest appearance of malice or satire, continually bring up points of discussion which we spent our best efforts in evading. Now that we were fairly proficient in their language, had read a lot about their history, and had given them the general outlines of ours, they were able to press their questions closer. So when Jeff admitted the number of women wage earners we had, they instantly asked for the total population, for the proportion of adult women, and found that there were but 20 million or so at the outside. Then at least a third of your women are, what is it you call them, wage earners? And they are all poor. What is poor, exactly? Ours is the best country in the world as to poverty, Terry told them. We do not have the wretched paupers and beggars of the older countries, I assure you. Why, European visitors tell us we don't know what poverty is. Neither do we, answered Zava. Won't you tell us? Terry put it up to me, saying I was the sociologist, and I explained that the laws of nature require a struggle for existence, and that in the struggle the fittest survive, and the unfit perish. In our economic struggle, I continued, there was always plenty of opportunity for the fittest to reach the top, which they did, in great numbers, particularly in our country. That where there was severe economic pressure, the lowest classes, of course, felt it the worst, and that among the poorest of all, the women were driven into the labor market by necessity. They listened closely, with the usual note-taking. About 1/3, then, belong to the poorest class, observed Moadine gravely. And 2/3 are the ones who are, how was it you so beautifully put it, loved, honored, kept in the home to care for the children. This inferior 1/3 have no children, I suppose. Jeff, he was getting as bad as they were, solemnly replied that, on the contrary, the poorer they were, the more children they had. That, too, he explained, was a law of nature. Reproduction is in inverse proportion to individuation. These laws of nature, Zava gently asked, are they all the laws you have? I should say not, protested Terry. We have systems of law that go back thousands and thousands of years, just as you do, no doubt. He finished politely. Oh, no, Moadine told him. We have no laws over 100 years old, and most of them are under 20. In a few weeks more, she continued, we are going to have the pleasure of showing you over our little land and explaining everything you care to know about. We want you to see our people. And I assure you, Somel added, that our people want to see you. Terry brightened up immensely at this news, and reconciled himself to the renewed demands upon our capacity as teachers. It was lucky that we knew so little, really, and had no books to refer to, else I fancy we might all be there yet, teaching those eager-minded women about the rest of the world. As to geography, they had the tradition of the great sea beyond the mountains, and they could see for themselves the endless thick-forested plains below them. That was all. But from the few records of their ancient condition, not before the flood with them, but before that mighty quake which had cut them off so completely, they were aware that there were other peoples and other countries. In geology, they were quite ignorant. As to anthropology, they had those same remnants of information about other peoples, and the knowledge of the savagery of the occupants of those dim forests below. Nevertheless, they had inferred, marvelously keen on inference and deduction their minds were, the existence and development of civilization in other places, much as we infer it on other planets. When our biplane came whirring over their heads in that first scouting flight of ours, they had instantly accepted it as proof of the high development of somewhere else, and had prepared to receive us as cautiously and eagerly as we might prepare to welcome visitors who came by meteor from Mars. Of history, outside their own, they knew nothing, of course, save for their ancient traditions. Of astronomy they had a fair working knowledge. That is a very old science, and with it a surprising range and facility in mathematics. Physiology they were quite familiar with. Indeed, when it came to the simpler and more concrete sciences, wherein the subject matter was at hand and they had but to exercise their minds upon it, the results were surprising. They had worked out a chemistry, a botany, a physics, with all the blends where a science touches an art, or merges into an industry, to such fullness of knowledge as made us feel like school-children. Also we found this out, as soon as we were free of the country and by further study and question, that what one knew, all knew, to a very considerable extent. I talked later with little mountain girls from the fir-dark valleys away up at their highest part, and with sunburned plainswomen and agile foresters all over the country, as well as those in the towns, and everywhere there was the same high level of intelligence. Some knew far more than others about one thing. They were specialized, of course, but all of them knew more about everything, that is, about everything the country was acquainted with, than is the case with us. We boast a good deal of our high level of general intelligence and our compulsory public education, but in proportion to their opportunities they were far better educated than our people. With what we told them, from what sketches and models we were able to prepare, they constructed a sort of working outline to fill in as they learned more. A big globe was made, and our uncertain maps, helped out by those in that precious yearbook thing I had, were tentatively indicated upon it. They sat in eager groups, masses of them who came for the purpose, and listened while Jeff roughly ran over the geologic history of the earth, and showed them their own land in relation to the others. Out of that same pocket reference book of mine came facts and figures that were seized upon and placed in right relation with unerring acumen. Even Terry grew interested in this work. "If we can keep this up, they'll be having us lecture to all the girls' schools and colleges. How about that?" he suggested to us. "Don't know as I'd object to being an authority to such audiences." They did, in fact, urge us to give public lectures later, but not to the hearers or with the purpose we expected. What they were doing with us was well, say like Napoleon extracting military information from a few illiterate peasants. They knew just what to ask, and just what use to make of it. They had mechanical appliances for disseminating information almost equal to ours at home, and by the time we were led forth to lecture, our audiences had thoroughly mastered a well-arranged digest of all we had previously given to our teachers, and were prepared with such notes and questions as might have intimidated a university professor. They were not audiences of girls either. It was some time before we were allowed to meet the young women. "Do you mind telling what you intend to do with us?" Terry burst forth one day, facing the calm and friendly Moadine with that funny, half-blustering air of his. At first he used to storm and flourish quite a good deal, but nothing seemed to amuse them more. They would gather round and watch him as if it was an exhibition, politely, but with evident interest. So he learned to check himself, and was almost reasonable in his bearing, but not quite. She announced smoothly and evenly, "Not in the least. I thought it was quite plain. We are trying to learn of you all we can, and to teach you what you are willing to learn of our country." "Is that all?" he insisted. She smiled a quiet, enigmatic smile. "That depends." "Depends on what?" "Mainly on yourselves," she replied. "Why do you keep us shut up so closely?" "Because we do not feel quite safe in allowing you at large where there are so many young women." Terry was really pleased at that. He had thought as much, inwardly, but he pushed the question. "Why should you be afraid? We are gentlemen." She smiled that little smile again and asked, Are gentlemen always safe?
You surely do not think that any one of us," he said it with a good deal of emphasis on the us, "would hurt your young girls?"
Oh, no, she said quickly in real surprise. The danger is quite the other way. They might hurt you. If by any accident you did harm any one of us, you would have to face 1,000,000 mothers. He looked so amazed and outraged that Jeff and I laughed outright, but she went on gently. I do not think you quite understand yet. You are but men, 3 men, in a country where the whole population are mothers, or are going to be. Motherhood means to us something which I cannot yet discover in any of the countries of which you tell us. You have spoken, she turned to Jeff, of human brotherhood as a great idea among you, but even that, I judge, is far from a practical expression. Jeff nodded rather sadly. Very far, he said. Here, we have human motherhood, in full working use, she went on. Nothing else except the literal sisterhood of our origin, and the far higher and deeper union of our social growth. The children in this country are the one center and focus of all our thoughts. Every step of our advance is always considered in its effect on them, on the race. You see, we are mothers, she repeated, as if in that she had said it all.
I don't see how that fact, which is shared by all women, constitutes any risk to us, Terry persisted. You mean they would defend their children from attack. Of course. Any mothers would. But we are not savages, my dear lady. We are not going to hurt any mother's child.
They looked at one another and shook their heads a little, but Zava turned to Jeff and urged him to make us see, said he seemed to understand more fully than we did. And he tried. I can see it now, or at least much more of it, but it has taken me a long time, and a good deal of honest intellectual effort. What they call motherhood was like this. They began with a really high degree of social development, something like that of ancient Egypt or Greece. Then they suffered the loss of everything masculine, and supposed at first that all human power and safety had gone too. Then they developed this virgin birth capacity. Then, since the prosperity of their children depended on it, the fullest and subtlest coordination began to be practiced. I remember how long Terry balked at the evident unanimity of these women, the most conspicuous feature of their whole culture. It's impossible, he would insist. Women cannot cooperate. It's against nature. When we urged the obvious facts, he would say, Fiddlesticks, or Hang your facts, I tell you it can't be done. And we never succeeded in shutting him up till Jeff dragged in the Hymenoptera. Go to the ant, thou sluggard, and learn something, he said triumphantly. Don't they cooperate pretty well? You can't beat it. This place is just like an enormous anthill. You know an anthill is nothing but a nursery. And how about bees? Don't they manage to cooperate and love one another? As the birds do love the spring, or the bees their careful king, as that precious constable had it. Just show me a combination of male creatures, bird, bug, or beast, that works as well, will you? Or one of our masculine countries where the people work together as well as they do here. I tell you, women are the natural cooperators, not men. Terry had to learn a good many things he did not want to. To go back to my little analysis of what happened. They developed all this close interservice in the interests of their children. To do the best work they had to specialize, of course. The children needed spinners and weavers, farmers and gardeners, carpenters and masons, as well as mothers. Then came the filling up of the place. When a population multiplies by 5 every 30 years, it soon reaches the limits of a country, especially a small one like this. They very soon eliminated all the grazing cattle. Sheep were the last to go, I believe. Also, they worked out a system of intensive agriculture, surpassing anything I ever heard of, with the very forests all reset with fruit or nut-bearing trees. Do what they would, however, there soon came a time when they were confronted with the problem of the pressure of population in an acute form. There was really crowding, and with it, unavoidably, a decline in standards. And how did those women meet it? Not by a struggle for existence which would result in an everlasting writhing mass of underbred people trying to get ahead of one another,
some few on top temporarily, many constantly crushed out underneath, a hopeless substratum of paupers and degenerates, and no serenity or peace for anyone, no possibility for really noble qualities among the people at large. Neither did they start off on predatory excursions to get more land from somebody else, or to get more food from somebody else, to maintain their struggling mass. Not at all. They sat down in council together and thought it out. Very clear, strong thinkers they were. They said, "With our best endeavours this country will support about so many people, with the standard of peace, comfort, health and beauty and progress we demand. Very well, that is all the people we will make." There you have it. You see, they were mothers, not in our sense of helpless involuntary fecundity, forced to fill and overfill the land, every land, and then see their children suffer, sin, and die, fighting horribly with one another, but in the sense of conscious makers of people. Mother love with them was not a brute passion, a mere instinct, a wholly personal feeling. It was a religion. It included that limitless feeling of sisterhood, that wide unity in service which was so difficult for us to grasp. And it was national, racial, human. Oh, I don't know how to say it. We are used to seeing what we call a mother, completely wrapped up in her own pink bundle of fascinating babyhood, and taking but the faintest theoretic interest in anybody else's bundle, to say nothing of the common needs of all the bundles. But these women were working all together at the grandest of tasks. They were making people, and they made them well. There followed a period of negative eugenics which must have been an appalling sacrifice. We are commonly willing to lay down our lives for our country, but they had to forego motherhood for their country, and it was precisely the hardest thing for them to do. When I got this far in my reading, I went to Somel for more light. We were as friendly by that time as I had ever been in my life with any woman. A mighty comfortable soul she was, giving one the nice smooth mother feeling a man likes in a woman, and yet giving also the clear intelligence and dependableness I used to assume to be masculine qualities. We had talked volumes already. "See here," said I, "here was this dreadful period when they got far too thick and decided to limit the population. We have a lot of talk about that among us, but your position is so different that I'd like to know a little more about it. I understand that you make motherhood the highest social service, a sacrament really, that it is only undertaken once, by the majority of the population, that those held unfit are not allowed even that, and that to be encouraged to bear more than one child is the very highest reward and honour in the power of the state." She interpolated here that the nearest approach to an aristocracy they had was to come of a line of over-mothers, those who had been so honoured. "But what I do not understand, naturally, is how you prevent it. I gathered that each woman had 5. You have no tyrannical husbands to hold in check, and you surely do not destroy the unborn." The look of ghastly horror she gave me I shall never forget. She started from her chair, pale, her eyes blazing. "Destroy the unborn," she said in a hard whisper. "Do men do that in your country?" "Men!" I began to answer rather hotly, and then saw the gulf before me. None of us wanted these women to think that our women, of whom we boasted so proudly, were in any way inferior to them. I am ashamed to say that I equivocated. I told her of certain criminal types of women, perverts, or crazy, who had been known to commit infanticide. I told her, truly enough, that there was much in our land which was open to criticism, but that I hated to dwell on our defects until they understood us and our conditions better. And making a wide detour, I scrambled back to my question of how they limited the population. As for Somel, she seemed sorry, a little ashamed even, of her too clearly expressed amazement. As I look back now, knowing them better, I am more and more and more amazed as I appreciate the exquisite courtesy with which they had received over and over again statements and admissions on our part which must have revolted them to the soul. She explained to me, with sweet seriousness, that as I had supposed, at first each woman bore 5 children, and that, in their eager desire to build up a nation, they had gone on in that way for a few centuries, till they were confronted with the absolute need of a limit. This fact was equally plain to all were equally interested. They were now as anxious to check their wonderful power as they had been to develop it, and for some generations gave the matter their most earnest thought and study. "We were living on rations before we worked it out," she said, "but we did work it out. You see, before a child comes to one of us, there is a period of utter exaltation. The whole being is uplifted and filled with a concentrated desire for that child. We learned to look forward to that period with the greatest caution. Often our young women, those to whom motherhood had not yet come, would voluntarily defer it. When that deep inner demand for a child began to be felt, she would deliberately engage in the most active work, physical and mental, and even more important, would solace her longing by the direct care and service of the babies we already had." She paused. Her wise, sweet face grew deeply, reverently tender. "We soon grew to see that mother-love has more than one channel of expression. I think the reason our children are so fully loved by all of us is that we never, any of us, have enough of our own." This seemed to me infinitely pathetic, and I said so. "We have much that is bitter and hard in our life at home," I told her, "but this seems to me piteous beyond words, a whole nation of starving mothers." But she smiled her deep, contented smile, and said I quite misunderstood. "We each go without a certain range of personal joy," she said, "but remember, we each have 1,000,000 children to love and serve, our children." It was beyond me. To hear a lot of women talk about our children. But I suppose that is the way the ants and bees would talk. Do talk, maybe. That was what they did, anyhow. When a woman chose to be a mother, she allowed the child longing to grow within her till it worked its natural miracle. When she did not so choose, she put the whole thing out of her mind and fed her heart with the other babies. Let me see. With us, children, minors that is, constitute about 3/5 of the population, with them only about 1/3 or less. And precious! No sole heir to an empire's throne, no solitary millionaire baby, no only child of middle-aged parents could compare as an idol with these Herland children. But before I start on that subject I must finish up that little analysis I was trying to make. They did effectually and permanently limit the population in numbers, so that the country furnished plenty for the fullest, richest life for all of them, plenty of everything, including room, air, solitude even. And then they set to work to improve that population in quality, since they were restricted in quantity. This they had been at work on, uninterruptedly, for some 1,500 years. Do you wonder they were nice people? Physiology, hygiene, sanitation, physical culture, all that line of work had been perfected long since. Sickness was almost wholly unknown among them, so much so that a previously high development in what we call the science of medicine had become practically a lost art. They were a clean-bred, vigorous lot, having the best of care, the most perfect living conditions always. When it came to psychology, there was no one thing which left us so dumbfounded, so really awed as the everyday working knowledge and practice they had in this line. As we learned more and more of it, we learned to appreciate the exquisite mastery with which we ourselves, strangers of alien race, of unknown opposite sex, had been understood and provided for from the first. With this wide, deep, thorough knowledge, they had met and solved the problems of education in ways some of which I hope to make clear later. Those nation-loved children of theirs compared with the average in our country as the most perfectly cultivated, richly developed roses compare with tumbleweeds. Yet they did not seem cultivated at all. It had all become a natural condition. And this people, steadily developing in mental capacity, in will-power, in social devotion, had been playing with the arts and sciences, as far as they knew them, for a good many centuries now with inevitable success. Into this quiet, lovely land, among these wise, sweet, strong women, we, in our easy assumption of superiority, had suddenly arrived, and now, tamed and trained to a degree they considered safe, we were at last brought out to see the country, to know the people. End of chapter 6.
Herland. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elizabeth Klett. Herland by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Chapter 7. Our Growing Modesty. Being at last considered sufficiently tamed and trained to be trusted with scissors, we barbered ourselves as best we could. A close-trimmed beard is certainly more comfortable than a full one. Razors, naturally, they could not supply. "With so many old women you'd think there'd be some razors," sneered Terry. Whereat Jeff pointed out that he never before had seen such complete absence of facial hair on women. "Looks to me as if the absence of men made them more feminine in that regard, anyhow," he suggested. "Well, it's the only one, then," Terry reluctantly agreed. "A less feminine lot I never saw. A child apiece doesn't seem to be enough to develop what I call motherliness." Terry's idea of motherliness was the usual one, involving a baby in arms, or a little flock about her knees, and the complete absorption of the mother in said baby or flock. A motherliness which dominated society, which influenced every art and industry, which absolutely protected all childhood, and gave to it the most perfect care and training, did not seem motherly to Terry. We had become well used to the clothes. They were quite as comfortable as our own, in some ways more so, and undeniably better looking. As to pockets, they left nothing to be desired. That second garment was fairly quilted with pockets. They were most ingeniously arranged, so as to be convenient to the hand and not inconvenient to the body, and were so placed as at once to strengthen the garment and add decorative lines of stitching. In this, as in so many other points we had now to observe, there was shown the action of a practical intelligence, coupled with fine artistic feeling, and apparently untrammeled by any injurious influences. Our first step of comparative freedom was a personally conducted tour of the country. No pentagonal bodyguard now. Only our special tutors, and we got on famously with them. Jeff said he loved Zava like an aunt. Only jollier than any aunt I ever saw. Somel and I were as chummy as could be, the best of friends. But it was funny to watch Terry and Moadine. She was patient with him, and courteous, but it was like the patience and courtesy of some great man, say a skilled, experienced diplomat, with a schoolgirl. Her grave acquiescence with his most preposterous expression of feeling, her genial laughter, not only with, but, I often felt, at him, though impeccably polite, her innocent questions, which almost invariably led him to say more than he intended, Jeff and I found it all amusing to watch. He never seemed to recognize that quiet background of superiority. When she dropped an argument he always thought he had silenced her. When she laughed he thought it tribute to his wit. I hated to admit to myself how much Terry had sunk in my esteem. Jeff felt it too, I'm sure, but neither of us admitted it to the other. At home we had measured him with other men, and though we knew his failings, he was by no means an unusual type. We knew his virtues, too, and they had always seemed more prominent than the faults. Measured among women, our women at home, I mean, he had always stood high. He was visibly popular. Even where his habits were known, there was no discrimination against him. In some cases his reputation for what was felicitously termed gaiety seemed a special charm. But here, against the calm wisdom and quiet restrained humour of these women, with only that blessed Jeff and my inconspicuous self to compare with, Terry did stand out rather strong. As a man among men, he didn't. As a man among, I shall have to say, females, he didn't. His intense masculinity seemed only fit complement to their intense femininity. But here he was all out of drawing. Moadine was a big woman, with a balanced strength that seldom showed. Her eye was as quietly watchful as a fencer's. She maintained a pleasant relation with her charge, but I doubt if many, even in that country, could have done as well. He called her Maud amongst ourselves, and said she was "a good old soul, but a little slow," wherein he was quite wrong. Needless to say, he called Jeff's teacher Java,
and sometimes mocha, or plain coffee, when especially mischievous, chicory, and even postum. But Somel rather escaped this form of humour, save for a rather forced "Somel." "Don't you people have but one name?" he asked one day, after we had been introduced to a whole group of them, all with pleasant, few-syllabled strange names like the ones we knew. "Oh, yes," Moadine told him. "A good many of us have another, as we get on in life, a descriptive one. That is the name we earn. Sometimes even that is changed, or added to, in an unusually rich life. Such as our present landmother, what you call president or king, I believe. She was called Mira, even as a child. That means thinker. Later there were added Mira, the wise thinker, and now we all know her as O Mira, great and wise thinker. You shall meet her." "No surnames at all, then?" pursued Terry, with his somewhat patronizing air. "No family name?" "Why, no," she said. "Why should we? We are all descended from a common source, all one family in reality. You see, our comparatively brief and limited history gives us that advantage at least." "But does not each mother want her own child to bear her name?" I asked. "No. Why should she? The child has its own." "Why, for identification, so people will know whose child she is." "We keep the most careful records," said Somel. "Each one of us has our exact line of descent all the way back to our dear first mother. There are many reasons for doing that. But as to everyone knowing which child belongs to which mother, why should she?" Here, as in so many other instances, we were led to feel the difference between the purely maternal and the paternal attitude of mind. The element of personal pride seemed strangely lacking. "How about your other works?" asked Jeff. "Don't you sign your names to them? Books and statues and so on?" "Yes, surely, we are all glad and proud to. Not only books and statues, but all kinds of work. You will find little names on the houses, on the furniture, on the dishes sometimes. Because otherwise one is likely to forget, and we want to know to whom to be grateful." "You speak as if it were done for the convenience of the consumer, not the pride of the producer," I suggested. "It's both," said Somel. "We have pride enough in our work." "Then why not in your children?" urged Jeff. "But we have. We're magnificently proud of them," she insisted. "Then why not sign 'em?" said Terry triumphantly. Moadine turned to him with her slightly quizzical smile. "Because the finished product is not a private one. When they are babies we do speak of them at times as Essa's Leto or Novine's Amel, but that is merely descriptive and conversational. In the records, of course, the child stands in her own line of mothers, but in dealing with it personally it is Leto or Amel, without dragging in its ancestors." "But you have names enough to give a new one to each child." "Assuredly we have, for each living generation." Then they asked about our methods, and found first that we did so and so, and then that other nations did differently. Upon which they wanted to know which method has been proved best, and we had to admit that so far as we knew there had been no attempt at comparison, each people pursuing its own custom in the fond conviction of superiority, and either despising or quite ignoring the others. With these women the most salient quality in all their institutions was reasonableness. When I dug into the records to follow out any line of development, that was the most astonishing thing, the conscious effort to make it better. They had early observed the value of certain improvements, had easily inferred that there was room for more, and took the greatest pains to develop two kinds of minds, the critic and inventor. Those who showed an early tendency to observe, to discriminate, to suggest, were given special training for that function, and some of their highest officials spent their time in the most careful study of one or another branch of work,
with a view to its further improvement. In each generation there was sure to arrive some new mind to detect faults and show need of alterations, and the whole corps of inventors was at hand to apply their special faculty at the point criticized, and offer suggestions. We had learned by this time not to open a discussion on any of their characteristics without first priming ourselves to answer questions about our own methods, so I kept rather quiet on this matter of conscious improvement. We were not prepared to show our way was better. There was growing in our minds, at least in Jeff's and mine, a keen appreciation of the advantages of this strange country and its management. Terry remained critical. We laid most of it to his nerves. He certainly was irritable. The most conspicuous feature of the whole land was the perfection of its food supply. We had begun to notice from that very first walk in the forest, the first partial view from our plane. Now we were taken to see this mighty garden, and shown its methods of culture. The country was about the size of Holland, some 10 or 12,000 square miles. One could lose a good many Hollands among the forest-smothered flanks of those mighty mountains. They had a population of about 3 million, not a large one, but quality is something. 3 million is quite enough to allow for considerable variation, and these people varied more widely than we could at first account for. Terry had insisted that if they were parthenogenetic, they'd be as alike as so many ants or aphids. He urged their visible differences as proof that there must be men, somewhere. But when we asked them in our later, more intimate conversations, how they accounted for so much divergence without cross-fertilization, they attributed it partly to the careful education, which followed each slight tendency to differ, and partly to the law of mutation. This they had found in their work with plants, and fully proven in their own case. Physically they were more alike than we, as they lacked all morbid or excessive types. They were tall, strong, healthy, and beautiful as a race, but differed individually in a wide range of feature, coloring, and expression. "But surely the most important growth is in mind, and in the things we make," urged Somel. "Do you find your physical variation accompanied by a proportionate variation in ideas, feelings, and products? Or, among people who look more alike, do you find their internal life and their work is similar?" We were rather doubtful on this point, and inclined to hold that there was more chance of improvement in greater physical variation. "It certainly should be," Zava admitted. "We have always thought it a grave initial misfortune to have lost half our little world. Perhaps that is one reason why we have so striven for conscious improvement." "But acquired traits are not transmissible," Terry declared. "Weissman has proved that." They never disputed our absolute statements, only made notes of them. "If that is so, then our improvement must be due either to mutation or solely to education," she gravely pursued. "We certainly have improved. It may be that all these higher qualities were latent in the original mother, that careful education is bringing them out, and that our personal differences depend on slight variations in prenatal condition." "I think it is more in your accumulated culture," Jeff suggested, "and in the amazing psychic growth you have made. We know very little about methods of real soul culture, and you seem to know a great deal." Be that as it might, they certainly presented a higher level of active intelligence and of behavior than we had so far really grasped. Having known in our lives several people who showed the same delicate courtesy and were equally pleasant to live with, at least when they wore their company manners, we had assumed that our companions were a carefully chosen few. Later we were more and more impressed that all this gentle breeding was breeding, that they were born to it, reared in it, that it was as natural and universal with them as the gentleness of doves or the alleged wisdom of serpents. As for the intelligence, I confess that this was the most impressive, and, to me, the most mortifying, of any single feature of Herland. We soon ceased to comment on this or other matters, which to them were such obvious commonplaces as to call forth embarrassing questions about our own conditions. This was nowhere better shown than in that matter of food supply, which I will now attempt to describe. Having improved their agriculture to the highest point, and carefully estimated the number of persons who could comfortably live on their square miles, having then limited their population to that number, one would think that was all there was to be done. But they had not thought so. To them the country was a unit. It was theirs. They themselves were a unit, a conscious group. They thought in terms of the community. As such, their time sense was not limited to the hopes and ambitions of an individual life. Therefore they habitually considered and carried out plans for improvement which might cover centuries. I had never seen, had scarcely imagined, human beings undertaking such a work as the deliberate replanting of an entire forest area with different kinds of trees. Yet this seemed to them the simplest common sense, like a man's ploughing up an inferior lawn and reseeding it. Now every tree bore fruit, edible fruit, that is. In the case of one tree, in which they took a special pride, it had originally no fruit at all, that is, none humanly edible, yet was so beautiful that they wished to keep it. For 900 years they had experimented, and now showed us this particularly lovely, graceful tree, with a profuse crop of nutritious seeds. They had early decided that trees were the best food plants, requiring far less labor in tilling the soil, and bearing a larger amount of food for the same ground space, also doing much to preserve and enrich the soil. Due regard had been paid to seasonable crops, and their fruit and nuts, grains and berries, kept on almost the year through. On the higher part of the country, near the backing wall of mountains, they had a real winter with snow. Toward the southeastern point, where there was a large valley with a lake whose outlet was subterranean, the climate was like that of California, and citrus fruits, figs, and olives grew abundantly. What impressed me particularly was their scheme of fertilization. Here was this little shut-in piece of land where one would have thought an ordinary people would have been starved out long ago, or reduced to an annual struggle for life. These careful culturists had worked out a perfect scheme of refeeding the soil with all that came out of it, all the scraps and leavings of their food, plant waste from lumber work or textile industry, all the solid matter from the sewage, properly treated and combined, everything which came from the earth went back to it. The practical result was like that in any healthy forest. An increasingly valuable soil was being built, instead of the progressive impoverishment so often seen in the rest of the world. When this first burst upon us, we made such approving comments that they were surprised that such obvious common sense should be praised, asked what our methods were, and we had some difficulty in diverting them, by referring to the extent of our own land and the admitted carelessness with which we had skimmed the cream of it. At least we thought we had diverted them. Later I found that besides keeping a careful and accurate account of all we told them, they had a sort of skeleton chart, on which the things we said and the things we palpably avoided saying were all set down and studied. It really was child's play for those profound educators to work out a painfully accurate estimate of our conditions, in some lines. When a given line of observation seemed to lead to some very dreadful inference, they always gave us the benefit of the doubt, leaving it open to further knowledge. Some of the things we had grown to accept as perfectly natural, or as belonging to our human limitations, they literally could not have believed. And, as I have said, we had all of us joined in a tacit endeavor to conceal much of the social status at home. "Confound their grandmotherly minds," Terry said. "Of course they can't understand a man's world. They aren't human. They are just a pack of females." This was after he had to admit their parthenogenesis. "I wish our grandfatherly minds had managed as well," said Jeff. "Do you really think it's to our credit that we have muddled along with all our poverty and disease and the like? They have peace and plenty, wealth and beauty, goodness and intellect. Pretty good people, I think." "You'll find they have their faults, too," Terry insisted. And partly in self-defense, we all three began to look for those faults of theirs. We had been very strong on this subject before we got there, in those baseless speculations of ours. "Suppose there is a country of women only," Jeff had put it over and over. "What'll they be like?" And we had been cocksure as to the inevitable limitations, the faults and vices of a lot of women. We had expected them to be given over to what we called feminine vanity, frills and furbelows,
and we found they had evolved a costume more perfect than the Chinese dress, richly beautiful when so desired, always useful, of unfailing dignity and good taste. We had expected a dull, submissive monotony, and found a daring social inventiveness far beyond our own, and a mechanical and scientific development fully equal to ours. We had expected pettiness, and found a social consciousness besides which our nations looked like quarrelling children, feeble-minded ones at that. We had expected jealousy, and found a broad sisterly affection, a fair-minded intelligence, to which we could produce no parallel. We had expected hysteria, and found a standard of health and vigour, a calmness of temper, to which the habit of profanity, for instance, was impossible to explain. We tried it. All these things even Terry had to admit, but he still insisted that we should find out the other side pretty soon. "It stands to reason, doesn't it?" he argued. "The whole thing's deuced unnatural. I'd say impossible if we weren't in it. And an unnatural condition's sure to have unnatural results. You'll find some awful characteristics, see if you don't. For instance, we don't know yet what they do with their criminals, their defectives, their aged. You notice we haven't seen any. There's got to be something." I was inclined to believe that there had to be something, so I took the bull by the horns, the cow, I should say, and asked Somel. "I want to find some flaw in all this perfection," I told her flatly. "It simply isn't possible that 3 million people have no faults. We are trying our best to understand and learn. Would you mind helping us by saying what, to your minds, are the worst qualities of this unique civilization of yours?" We were sitting together in a shaded arbour, in one of those eating gardens of theirs. The delicious food had been eaten, a plate of fruit still before us. We could look out on one side over a stretch of open country, quietly rich and lovely, on the other the garden, with tables here and there, far apart enough for privacy. Let me say right here that with all their careful balance of population, there was no crowding in this country. There was room, space, a sunny, breezy freedom everywhere. Somel set her chin upon her hand, her elbow on the low wall beside her, and looked off over the fair land. "Of course we have faults, all of us," she said. "In one way you might say that we have more than we used to. That is, our standard of perfection seems to get farther and farther away. But we are not discouraged, because our records do show gain, considerable gain. When we began, even with the start of one particularly noble mother, we inherited the characteristics of a long race record behind her, and they cropped out from time to time, alarmingly. But it is, yes, quite 600 years since we have had what you call a criminal. We have, of course, made it our first business to train out, to breed out, when possible, the lowest types." "Breed out?" I asked. "How could you, with parthenogenesis?" "If the girl showing the bad qualities had still the power to appreciate social duty, we appealed to her, by that, to renounce motherhood. Some of the worst types were, fortunately, unable to reproduce. But if the fault was in a disproportionate egotism, then the girl was sure she had the right to have children, even that hers would be better than others." "I can see that," I said, "and then she would be likely to rear them in the same spirit." "That we never allowed," answered Somel quietly. "Allowed?" I queried. "Allowed a mother to rear her own children?" "Certainly not," said Somel, "unless she was fit for that supreme task." This was rather a blow to my previous convictions. "But I thought motherhood was for each of you." "Motherhood, yes, that is, maternity, to bear a child. But education is our highest art, only allowed to our highest artists." "Education?" I was puzzled again. "I don't mean education. I mean by motherhood not only child-bearing, but the care of babies." "The care of babies involves education, and is entrusted only to the most fit," she repeated. "Then you separate mother and child!" I cried out in cold horror, something of Terry's feeling creeping over me, that there must be something wrong among these many virtues.
Not usually, she patiently explained. You see, almost every woman values her maternity above everything else. Each girl holds it close and dear, an exquisite joy, a crowning honor, the most intimate, most personal, most precious thing. That is, the child-rearing has come to be with us a culture so profoundly studied, practiced with such subtlety and skill, that the more we love our children the less we are willing to trust that process to unskilled hands, even our own. "But a mother's love," I ventured. She studied my face, trying to work out a means of clear explanation. "You told us about your dentists," she said at length, "those quaintly specialized persons who spend their lives filling little holes in other persons' teeth, even in children's teeth sometimes." "Yes," I said, not getting her drift. "Does mother love urge mothers, with you, to fill their own children's teeth, or to wish to?" "Why, no, of course not," I protested. "But that is a highly specialized craft. Surely the care of babies is open to any woman, any mother." "We do not think so," she gently replied. "Those of us who are the most highly competent fulfill that office, and a majority of our girls eagerly try for it. I assure you we have the very best." "But the poor mother, bereaved of her baby!" "Oh, no," she earnestly assured me, "not in the least bereaved. It is her baby still. It is with her. She has not lost it. But she is not the only one to care for it. There are others whom she knows to be wiser. She knows it because she has studied as they did, practiced as they did, and honors their real superiority. For the child's sake, she is glad to have for it this highest care." I was unconvinced. Besides, this was only hearsay. I had yet to see the motherhood of Herland. End of chapter 7.
Of Herland. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Leon Meyer. Herland by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Chapter 8. The Girls of Herland. At last, Terry's ambition was realized. We were invited, always courteously and with free choice on our part, to address general audiences and classes of girls. I remember the first time, and how careful we were about our clothes, and our amateur barbering. Terry, in particular, was fussy to a degree about the cut of his beard, and so critical of our combined efforts that we handed him the shears and told him to please himself. We began to rather prize those beards of ours. They were almost our sole distinction among these tall and sturdy women, with their cropped hair and sexless costume. Being offered a wide selection of garments, we had chosen according to our personal taste, and were surprised to find, on meeting large audiences, that we were the most highly decorated, especially Terry. He was a very impressive figure, his strong features softened by the somewhat longer hair, though he made me trim it as closely as I knew how, and he wore his richly embroidered tunic with its broad, loose girdle with quite a Henry V air. Jeff looked more like a Huguenot lover, and I don't know what I looked like, only that I felt very comfortable. When I got back to our own padded armor and its starched borders, I realized with acute regret how comfortable were those Herland clothes. We scanned that audience, looking for the three bright faces we knew, but they were not to be seen. Just a multitude of girls, quiet, eager, watchful, all eyes and ears to listen and learn. We had been urged to give, as fully as we cared to, a sort of synopsis of world history in brief, and to answer questions. "We are so utterly ignorant, you see," Moadine had explained to us. "We know nothing but such science as we have worked out for ourselves, just the brainwork of one small half-country. And you, we gather, have helped one another all over the globe, sharing your discoveries, pooling your progress. How wonderful, how supremely beautiful your civilization must be!" Somel gave a further suggestion. You do not have to begin all over again, as you did with us. We have made a sort of digest of what we have learned from you, and it has been eagerly absorbed all over the country. Perhaps you would like to see our outline? We were eager to see it, and deeply impressed. To us, at first, these women, unavoidably ignorant of what to us was the basic commonplace of knowledge, had seemed on the plane of children, or of savages. What we had been forced to admit, with growing acquaintance, was that they were ignorant as Plato and Aristotle were, but with a highly developed mentality quite comparable to that of ancient Greece. Far be it from me to lumber these pages with an account of what we so imperfectly strove to teach them. The memorable fact is what they taught us, or some faint glimpse of it. And at present our major interest was not at all in the subject matter of our talk, but in the audience. Girls, hundreds of them, eager, bright-eyed, attentive young faces, crowding questions, and, I regret to say, an increasing inability on our part to answer them effectively. Our special guides, who were on the platform with us, and sometimes aided in clarifying a question, or oftener an answer, noticed this effect, and closed the formal lecture part of the evening rather shortly. Our young women will be glad to meet you, Somel suggested, to talk with you more personally, if you are willing. Willing! We were impatient, and said as much, at which I saw a flickering little smile cross Moadine's face. Even then, with all those eager young things waiting to talk to us, a sudden question crossed my mind. What was their point of view? What did they think of us? We learned that later. Terry plunged in among those young creatures with a sort of rapture, somewhat as a glad swimmer takes to the sea. Jeff, with a rapt look on his high-bred face, approached as to a sacrament. But I was a little chilled by that last thought of mine, and kept my eyes open. I found time to watch Jeff, even while I was surrounded by an eager group of questioners, as we all were, and saw how his worshipping eyes, his grave courtesy, pleased and drew some of them, while others, rather stronger spirits they looked to be, drew away from his group to Terry's or mine. I watched Terry with special interest, knowing how he had longed for this time, and how irresistible he had always been at home. And I could see, just in snatches of course, how his suave and masterful approach seemed to irritate them, his too intimate glances were vaguely resented, his compliments puzzled and annoyed. Sometimes a girl would flush, not with drooped eyelids and inviting timidity, but with anger and a quick lift of the head. Girl after girl turned on her heel and left him, till he had but a small ring of questioners, and they, visibly, were the least girlish of the lot. I saw him looking pleased at first, as if he thought he was making a strong impression, but finally, casting a look at Jeff or me, he seemed less pleased and less. As for me, I was most agreeably surprised. At home I never was popular. I had my girlfriends, good ones, but they were friends, nothing else. Also they were of somewhat the same clan, not popular in the sense of swarming admirers. But here, to my astonishment, I found my crowd was the largest. I have to generalize, of course, rather telescoping many impressions, but the first evening was a good sample of the impression we made. Jeff had a following, if I may call it that, of the more sentimental, though that's not the word I want. The less practical, perhaps, the girls who were artists of some sort, ethicists, teachers, that kind. Terry was reduced to a rather combative group, keen, logical, inquiring minds, not overly sensitive, the very kind he liked least, while as for me, I became quite cocky over my general popularity. Terry was furious about it. We could hardly blame him. "Girls," he burst forth, when that evening was over and we were by ourselves once more, "call those girls." "Most delightful girls, I call them," said Jeff, his blue eyes dreamily contented. "What do you call them?" I mildly inquired. "Boys! Nothing but boys, most of 'em. A standoffish, disagreeable lot at that. Critical, impertinent youngsters. No girls at all." He was angry and severe, not a little jealous, too, I think. Afterward, when he found out just what it was they did not like, he changed his manner somewhat and got on better. He had to. For, in spite of his criticism, they were girls, and furthermore, all the girls there were, always excepting our three, with whom we presently renewed our acquaintance. When it came to courtship, which it soon did, I can, of course, best describe my own, and am least inclined to. But of Jeff I heard somewhat. He was inclined to dwell reverently and admiringly, at some length, on the exalted sentiment and measureless perfection of his Celis. And Terry made so many false starts and met so many rebuffs, that by the time he really settled down to win Alima, he was considerably wiser. At that, it was not smooth sailing. They broke and quarreled over and over. He would rush off to console himself with some other fair one, the other fair one would have none of him, and he would drift back to Alima, becoming more and more devoted each time. She never gave an inch. A big, handsome creature, rather exceptionally strong, even in that race of strong women, with a proud head and sweeping level brows that lined across above her dark eager eyes like the wide wings of a soaring hawk. I was good friends with all three of them, but best of all with Ellador, long before that feeling changed for both of us. From her, and from Somel, who talked very freely with me, I learned at last something of the viewpoint of Herland toward its visitors. Here they were, isolated, happy, contented, when the booming buzz of our biplane tore the air above them. Everybody heard it, saw it, for miles and miles. Word flashed all over the country, and a council was held in every town and village. And this was their rapid determination. From another country, probably men, evidently highly civilized, doubtless possessed of much valuable knowledge, may be dangerous. Catch them if possible, tame and train them if necessary. This may be a chance to re-establish a bisexual state for our people. They were not afraid of us. 3 million highly intelligent women, or 2 million counting only grown-ups, were not likely to be afraid of 3 young men. We thought of them as women and therefore timid, but it was 2,000 years since they had had anything to be afraid of, and certainly more than 1,000 since they had outgrown the feeling. We thought, at least Terry did, that we could have our pick of them. They thought, very cautiously and far-sightedly, of picking us, if it seemed wise. All that time we were in training, they studied us, analyzed us, prepared reports about us, and this information was widely disseminated all about the land. Not a girl in that country had not been learning for months as much as could be gathered about our country, our culture, our personal characters. No wonder their questions were hard to answer. But I am sorry to say, when we were at last brought out and exhibited, I hate to call it that, but that's what it was, there was no rush of takers. Here was poor old Terry fondly imagining that at last he was free to stray in a rosebud garden of girls, and behold, the rosebuds were all with keen appraising eye, studying us. They were interested, profoundly interested, but it was not the kind of interest we were looking for. To get an idea of their attitude, you have to hold in mind their extremely high sense of solidarity. They were not each choosing a lover, they hadn't the faintest idea of love, sex love, that is. To each of whom motherhood was a lodestar, and that motherhood exalted above a mere personal function, looked forward to as the highest social service, as the sacrament of a lifetime, were now confronted with an opportunity to make the great step of changing their whole status, of reverting to their earlier bisexual order of nature. Beside this underlying consideration, there was the limitless interest and curiosity in our civilization, purely impersonal, and held by an order of mind beside which we were like schoolboys. It was small wonder that our lectures were not a success, and none at all that our, or at least Terry's, advances were so ill received. The reason for my own comparative success was at first far from pleasing to my pride. "We like you the best," Somel told me, "because you seem more like us." More like a lot of women, I thought to myself disgustedly, and then remembered how little like women, in our derogatory sense, they were. She was smiling at me, reading my thought. "We can quite see that we do not seem like women to you. Of course, in a bisexual race the distinctive feature of each sex must be intensified. But surely there are characteristics enough which belong to people, aren't there? That's what I mean about you being more like us. More like people. We feel at ease with you." Jeff's difficulty was his exalted gallantry. He idealized women, and was always looking for a chance to protect or to serve them. These needed neither protection nor service. They were living in peace and power and plenty. We were their guests, their prisoners, absolutely dependent. Of course we could promise whatsoever we might of advantages if they would come to our country, but the more we knew of theirs, the less we boasted. Terry's jewels and trinkets they prized as curious, handed them about, asking questions as to workmanship, not in the least as to value, and discussed not ownership, but which museum to put them in. When a man has nothing to give a woman, is dependent wholly on his personal attraction, his courtship is under limitations. They were considering these two things, the advisability of making the great change, and the degree of personal adaptability which would best serve that end. Here we had the advantage of our small personal experience with those 3 Fleet Forest girls, and that served to draw us together. As for Ellador, suppose you come to a strange land and find it pleasant enough, just a little more than ordinarily pleasant, and then you find rich farmland, and then gardens, gorgeous gardens, and then palaces full of rare and curious treasures, incalculable, inexhaustible, and then mountains like the Himalayas, and then the sea. I liked her that day she balanced on the branch before me and named the trio. I thought of her most. Afterward I turned to her like a friend when we met for the third time and continued the acquaintance. While Jeff's ultra devotion rather puzzled Celis, really put off their day of happiness, while Terry and Alima quarreled and parted, re-met and reparted, Ellador and I grew to be close friends. We talked and talked. We took long walks together. She showed me things, explained them, interpreted much that I had not understood. Through her sympathetic intelligence I became more and more comprehending of the spirit of the people of Herland, more and more appreciative of its marvelous inner growth as well as outer perfection. I ceased to feel a stranger, a prisoner. There was a sense of understanding, of identity, of purpose. We discussed everything. And as I traveled farther and farther, exploring the rich, sweet soul of her, my sense of pleasant friendship became but a broad foundation for such height, such breadth, such interlocked combination of feeling as left me fairly blinded with the wonder of it. As I have said, I had never cared very much for women, nor they for me, not Terry fashion. But this one. At first I never even thought of her "in that way," as the girls have it. I had not come to the country with any Turkish harem intentions, and I was no woman worshipper like Jeff. I just liked that girl as a friend, as we say. That friendship grew like a tree. She was such a good sport. We did all kinds of things together. She taught me games, and I taught her games, and we raced and rode and had all manner of fun, as well as higher comradeship. Then, as I got on farther, the palace and treasures and snowy mountain ranges opened up. I had never known there could be such a human being. So great. I don't mean talented. She was a forester, one of the best, but it was not that gift I mean. When I say great, I mean great, big, all through. If I had known more of those women as intimately, I should not have found her so unique, but even among them she was noble. Her mother was an overmother, and her grandmother too, I heard later. So she told me more and more of her beautiful land, and I told her as much, yes, more than I wanted to, about mine, and we became inseparable. Then this deeper recognition came and grew. I felt my own soul rise and lift its wings, as it were. Life got bigger. It seemed as if I understood, as I never had before, as if I could do things, as if I too could grow, if she would help me. And then it came, to both of us, all at once. A still day, on the edge of the world, their world. The two of us gazing out over the far dim forest land below, talking of heaven and earth and human life, and of my land and other lands, and what they needed, and what I hoped to do for them. "If you will help me," I said. She turned to me with that high, sweet look of hers, and then, as her eyes rested in mine, and her hands too, then suddenly there blazed out between us a farther glory, instant, overwhelming, quite beyond any words of mine to tell. Celis was a blue and gold and rose person, Alma black and white and red, a blazing beauty. Ellador was brown, hair dark and soft like a seal coat, clear brown skin with a healthy red in it, brown eyes, all the way from topaz to black velvet they seemed to range. Splendid girls, all of them. They had seen us first of all, far down in the lake below, and flashed the tidings across the land even before our first exploring flight. They had watched our landing, flitted through the forest with us, hidden in that tree, and, I shrewdly suspect, giggled on purpose. They had kept watch over our hooded machine, taking turns at it, and, when our escape was announced, had followed alongside for a day or two, and been there at the last, as described. They felt a special claim on us, called us their men, and when we were at liberty to study the land and people, and be studied by them, their claim was recognized by the wise leaders. But I felt, we all did, that we should have chosen them among millions, unerringly. And yet the path of true love never did run smooth. This period of courtship was full of the most unsuspected pitfalls. Writing this as late as I do, after manifold experiences both in her land and later in my own land, I can now understand and philosophize about what was then a continual astonishment and often a temporary tragedy. The long suit in most courtships is sex attraction, of course, then gradually develops such comradeship as the two temperaments allow. Then, after marriage, there is either the establishment of a slow-growing, widely based friendship, the deepest, tenderest, sweetest of relations, all lit and warmed by the recurrent flame of love, or else that process is reversed. Love cools and fades, no friendship grows, the whole relation turns from beauty to ashes. Here everything was different. There was no sex feeling to appeal to, or practically none. 2,000 years' disuse had left very little of the instinct. Also we must remember that those who had at times manifested it as atavistic exceptions were often by that very fact denied motherhood. Yet while the mother process remains, the inherent ground for sex distinction remains also. and who shall say what long-forgotten feeling, vague and nameless, was stirred in some of these mother hearts by our arrival? What left us even more at sea in our approach was the lack of any sex tradition. There was no accepted standard of what was manly and what was womanly. When Jeff said, taking the fruit basket from his adored one, "A woman should not carry anything," Silas said, "Why?" with the frankest amazement. He could not look that fleet-footed, deep-chested young forester in the face and say, "Because she is weaker." She wasn't. One does not call a racehorse weak because it is visibly not a cart horse. He said, rather lamely, that women were not built for heavy work. She looked out across the fields to where some women were working, building a new bit of wall out of large stones, looked back at the nearest town with its woman-built houses, down at the smooth, hard road we were walking on, and then at the little basket he had taken from her. "I don't understand," she said quite sweetly. "Are the women in your country so weak that they could not carry such a thing as that?" "It is a convention," he said. "We assume that motherhood is a sufficient burden, that men should carry all the others." "What a beautiful feeling!" she said, her blue eyes shining. "Does it work?" asked Alima in her keen, swift way. "Do all men in all countries carry everything, or is it only in yours?" "Don't be so literal," Terry begged lazily. "Why aren't you willing to be worshipped and waited on? We like to do it." "You don't like to have us do it to you," she answered. "That's different," he said, annoyed, and when she said, "Why is it?" he quite sulked, referring her to me, saying, "Van's the philosopher." Ellador and I talked it all out together, so that we had an easier experience of it when the real miracle time came. Also, between us, we made things clearer to Jeff and Silas, but Terry would not listen to reason. He was madly in love with Alima. He wanted to take her by storm, and nearly lost her forever. You see, if a man loves a girl who is in the first place young and inexperienced, who in the second place is educated with a background of caveman tradition, a middle ground of poetry and romance, and a foreground of unspoken hope and interest, all centering upon the one event, and who has, furthermore, absolutely no other hope or interest worthy of the name, why, it is a comparatively easy matter to sweep her off her feet with a dashing attack. Terry was a past master in this process. He tried it here, and Alima was so affronted, so repelled, that it was weeks before he got near enough to try again. The more coldly she denied him, the hotter his determination. He was not used to real refusal. The approach of flattery she dismissed with laughter. Gifts and such attentions we could not bring to bear. Pathos and complaint of cruelty stirred only a reasoning inquiry. It took Terry a long time. I doubt if she ever accepted her strange lover as fully as did Silas and Ellador theirs. He had hurt and offended her too often. There were reservations. But I think Alima retained some faint vestige of long-descended feeling which made Terry more possible to her than to others, and that she had made up her mind to the experiment and hated to renounce it. However it came about, we all three at length achieved full understanding, and solemnly faced what was to them a step of measureless importance, a grave question as well as a great happiness, to us a strange new joy. Of marriage as a ceremony they knew nothing. Jeff was for bringing them to our country for the religious and the civil ceremony, but neither Silas nor the others would consent. "We can't expect them to want to go with us yet," said Terry sagely. "Wait a bit, boys. We've got to take 'em on their own terms, if at all." This in rueful reminiscence of his repeated failures. "But our time's coming," he added cheerfully. "These women have never been mastered, you see." This as one who had made a discovery. "You'd better not try to do any mastering, if you value your chances," I told him seriously, but he only laughed and said, Every man to his trade. We couldn't do anything with him. He had to take his own medicine. If the lack of tradition of courtship left us much at sea in our wooing, we found ourselves still more bewildered by lack of tradition of matrimony. And here again I have to draw on later experience, and as deep an acquaintance with their culture as I could achieve, to explain the gulfs of difference between us. 2,000 years of one continuous culture with no men. Back of that, only traditions of the harem. They had no exact analogue for our word home, any more than they had for our Roman-based family. They loved one another with a practically universal affection, rising to exquisite and unbroken friendships, and broadening to a devotion to their country and people for which our word patriotism is no definition at all. Patriotism, red hot, is compatible with the existence of a neglect of national interests, a dishonesty, a cold indifference to the suffering of millions. Patriotism is largely pride, and very largely combativeness. Patriotism generally has a chip on its shoulder. This country had no other country to measure itself by, save the few poor savages far below, with whom they had no contact. They loved their country because it was their nursery, playground, and workshop, theirs and their children's. They were proud of it as a workshop, proud of their record of ever-increasing efficiency. They had made a pleasant garden of it, a very practical little heaven, but most of all they valued it, and here it is hard for us to understand them, as a cultural environment for their children. That, of course, is the keynote of the whole distinction, their children. From those first breathlessly guarded, half-adored race mothers, all up the ascending line, they had this dominant thought of building up a great race through the children. All the surrendering devotion our women have put into their private families, these women put into their country and race. All the loyalty and service men expect of wives, they gave not singly to men, but collectively to one another. And the mother instinct, with us so painfully intense, so thwarted by conditions, so concentrated in personal devotion to a few, so bitterly hurt by death, disease, or barrenness, and even by the mere growth of the children, leaving the mother alone in her empty nest, all this feeling with them flowed out in a strong, wide current, unbroken through the generations, deepening and widening through the years, including every child in all the land. With their united power and wisdom, they had studied and overcome the diseases of childhood. Their children had none. They had faced the problems of education, and so solved them that their children grew up as naturally as young trees, learning through every sense, taught continuously but unconsciously, never knowing they were being educated. In fact, they did not use the word as we do. Their idea of education was the special training they took, when half grown up, under experts. Then the eager young minds fairly flung themselves on their chosen subjects, and acquired with an ease, a breadth, a grasp, at which I never ceased to wonder. But the babies and little children never felt the pressure of that forcible feeding of the mind that we call education. Of this more later. End of chapter 8.